Before we go to the details, I want to share one thing with all of you that India is on a growth trajectory. In the short term, if we, for the time being, if we forget about the pandemic, the growth rate will come down in 1 year, 2 year. But India is on a growth trajectory of 8%, which we did in the last decade or so. At the same time, the per capita consumption of a typical Indian is about 1,000 kilowatt per hour per capita. The world global average is about 4 to 5,000. Even China is about 4 to 5,000. Let's forget about Europe and US, which is about 6,000 plus. The point I'm trying to say is if India continues to grow, and which we will grow, the per capita consumption of a typical Indian will increase from 1,000 to 1,500 in the next decade or so. So we are looking at huge demand on energy sector if the growth rate continues, and we need this energy to grow. And if we grow, we will need more energy. So that's the one aspect of the energy transition which we're going to talk about. And then the second aspect is we are committed to the Paris Treaty, which I will come later. And last week, Honorable Prime Minister announced that we are on path of not only meeting but also exceeding the India goals for Paris Treaty. So what I'm trying to say is we will grow, we will need more energy, but we will need more sustainable and sensible energy from renewables, which is climate change friendly. Now, for all these things, financing is the key. We may have the best policy and regulations and the vision which India has, but unless we have both domestic and international financing, all these targets, all these goals may or may not be achieved. So, when do you understand that any renewable energy or any other targets by a country is being met if we are able to mobilize dollars and rupees on the ground? That's the yardstick, I would say, is key to determine. And then finally, as Arjun mentioned, what is the role of multilaterals? What is the role of World Bank? While we acknowledge, for example, for India's renewable energy needs, we require $200 billion or more. Multilateral roles is not mainstream. We cannot provide such large amount, but I will showcase one or two projects where a small amount for multilaterals, for example, in solar rooftop, where we provided $500 million, they're able to leverage 10 times more. So the role of multilaterals like World Bank is to be the risk taker in the market, to convince the other commercial bankers to come and invest in renewable energy and help in energy transition. Now, let me pick up where Joe mentioned, if we continue to achieve the RE targets in solar and wind going forward. For example, again, Joe mentioned Honorable Prime Minister inaugurated 30 gigawatts of renewables in Kutch. Now, what we have to think is if we do install, and I wish we install 30 gigawatts of solar and wind in Kutch, Gujarat cannot absorb that power, right? So we have two options. Either we take that power to Maharashtra, Mumbai, or we take it to Delhi, because these are the demand centers which can absorb such amount of power. But through the One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative, we can also explore of exporting this power to Gulf. I will again come back to this in later slides. As I mentioned, along with the growth story, we have committed to the whole world that Government of India will reduce its GDP emissions instantly by 33 to 35%. And last week, Honorable Prime Minister mentioned we are going to increase this target and probably achieve around 40% in 2030. Today, we have already achieved 21% emission intensity reduction. So India is very much on track, not only to achieve, but also to exceed the climate targets. And then 40% cumulative electric power from non-fossil also is on track as per the Government of India records, and also likely to supersede. Now, while we are all convinced that renewables and energy transition is required, it is very important the energy we generate is reliable, clean, modern, and affordable to every Indian in villages and in cities. It is also important, and this is very important under the pandemic times, that the energy we produce should be sustainable and should generate jobs. Now, the panelist and the audience who is joining us today, we are all here because we are big fans of solar and wind. But when you talk to the government, it is very important we understand the government's point of view as well. Government wants to do two things right now. They want to kickstart the economy, and secondly, they want to create jobs. They want to create jobs in the MSME sector, in the renewable energy sector. And Government of India has taken a lot of steps, for example, in manufacturing, in the Atmanirbhar campaign, in kickstarting the electric vehicles and e-mobility, in starting the power sector reforms. This is all towards green jobs and kickstarting the economy. The per capita emissions by India remains very low, but if we continue to grow, they are going to increase, and that's another reasons why we should move towards renewable energy. And as Joe mentioned, there are practically no new coal plants being planned in the country. Now, last 10 years has been revolutionary for India. In way back in 2009 and 10, when National Solar Mission was launched, I was working with the Clinton Foundation at that time. And when 20 gigawatt target was set, everybody in the market said, this is not achievable. This is very ambitious. And 3 years later, the target was increased from 20 to 100 gigawatt. And last year, it was increased to 450 gigawatts. So the point I'm trying to say is from 17 rupees solar, today we are fighting over 2 rupees. That 2.5 is high, 2.4 is high. We want lower and lower. So we have come a long way in the last 10 years. And now nobody wants to be convinced about solar and wind, but we have to take some transformatory steps, innovative steps for energy transition. And I will give two examples. One example is the success India has achieved in the case of solar park. In Gujarat, I was fortunate to work when I was with ADB at that time, when we had a 15 rupee GBI in Gujarat Solar Park. And now we have Reva Solar Park and Pavagadh Solar Park, where prices have come down to 2.5 and 2.6. So the innovations done in terms of plug and play by the government and by the private sector in infrastructure development will be a key for energy transition and moving towards our goal. Again, this is something, area which is very important, as Arjun mentioned. While solar parks have been a big success, decentralized energy has been challenging. Against a 40 gigawatt target, we have only achieved 5.5 gigawatt. Now, when we say energy transition, we are moving from thermal to renewables, but we have to accept the fact that renewables is inform. We only get solar and wind when we have sun and air. So in case of decentralized energy, for example, in solar rooftop, the energy transition becomes simpler because you consume and you generate. For example, if I'm going to have a solar rooftop on my house, I can consume 80 to 90% of that in my house and probably transfer 10% to net metering through my local discom. And believe me, I'm going to do that. That's under process. And when we talk about energy transition, we talk about convergence. When 2 or 3 years down the line, I will have a electric vehicle charging station in my society where I can pass on the electrons generated by solar rooftop into this charging facility and then charge my electric vehicle. That's the convergence. That's the energy transition we are looking for in the next 2 to 5 years. And I truly believe this can happen. Now, what role did the World Bank play in the solar rooftop sector? 4 years back in 2016, When solar park was making news, solar rooftop was still struggling. Interest rates were as high as 16%, and also the ecosystem required for solar rooftop policy, regulatory awareness, capacity building was missing in the market. We were asked by Government of India to join SBI and also launched a large technical assistance program where we worked with 17 states to increase their awareness and brought about significant policy and regulatory changes in the solar rooftop sector. And today, from 500, we have moved to 5.5 gigawatts. Yes, we have a long way to go, but $500 million from the World Bank mobilized about $3.5 billion. And we continue to work now for MSME and in the residential sector. So innovations like this by multilaterals opens up the market, and we being the first risk takers give comfort to other investors and private equity players to come and invest in the market. Now, when we move towards the energy transition, there has to be a growth of electricity market in India, and this has also been addressed in the recent amendment of the Electricity Act. The power sold right now in power exchanges is only about 1%, and it has increased to 4.3%, but we are still a long way to go. There will be a time when a common man, a household, or an industry will start generating solar and wind and will start selling power to the merchant and in the market. So that's again a part of the global transition where we are heading in the next 2 to 5 years. Joe mentioned that India is power surplus, which I will say that once the pandemic times are over, the generation increases, we will again start consuming more and more electricity, and we will not only have an opportunity to transfer power, but also to import power, which will be sustainable in nature. As I mentioned, 30 gigawatts in Kutch, there will be a need to explore transferring the power to other countries and also maybe to import power from other countries. This is already happening in Europe, where we already have solar in Spain being transferred to Northern Europe, which has more hydro, to the Western Europe, which has more wind power through the Atlantic winds. So Europe works as a super grid, and this is something the World Bank is trying to do with International Solar Alliance and with MNRE through the One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative. Very quickly, what does it mean? It is based on a principle that sun never sets. Sun, which comes up in Japan in the morning, comes to Southeast Asia, and it comes to India, it goes to Gulf, goes to Africa, and goes to America and Europe. So there will be always sun and solar electrons passing from one country to another. Can we have interconnectors? Can we have intercontinental grids connecting, again, for example, from India to Southeast Asia via Myanmar, or India to Gulf via undersea cables from Kutch to, let's say, Oman? This is a study, a roadmap, and a vision study, which we are trying to do with ISA and MNRE to explore three pilots. One, India with Gulf. Second, India with Southeast Asia. And third, India to Africa via Gulf. To explore, once we achieve tens of gigawatts of solar and wind in different countries, how do we exchange power with these countries via land or via intersea cables? Let me stop here and give it back to Arjun.